Bubbles. Dark basement. Scuttles. Fingernails.
Hey everyone, it's Rose. Just a quick reminder to like, follow, and subscribe either on the podcast app that you're using or at our website, greatnorthwitches.com. Thanks.
Greetings, witches, and welcome to another episode from the Great North Witches Collective podcast, the Canadian witchy podcast that delves into current issues affecting witches everywhere. Today we're going to be discussing the topic of taboo witchcraft practices. Where do they come from? Why are they taboo? And what are our thoughts and opinions on the subject? And believe me, there's opinions to be shared. Before we get into it, I want to clarify that we are under no circumstances trying to reinforce that these practices should be something that you should avoid in your craft. Rather, we believe that an open, honest discussion on topics such as these help witches make informed decisions on their practice, and in the end, may remove some of the stigma that surrounds these ideas and scare some people off. Every witch is free to make their own decisions on what they will and will not incorporate into their craft, and we wouldn't dream of telling you that you should do it any other way. With that disclaimer out of the way, allow me to introduce myself. My name is Nikka. I'm also known as a Fantastic Witch. I'm a Celtic pagan with an eclectic practice focusing on hearthcraft, and I've got some friends here today to join the discussion. Ladies, would you care to introduce yourselves?
My name is Kory. I'm a eclectic grey witch. I've been in practice for over 20 years. I like to try different venues and experiment with different kinds of magic. I create my own occult supplies as well as I make jewelry. I have my lovely sister here as well.
Hello, I am the lovely sister. My name is Kyla, and I am also an eclectic witch, but I practice pantheism and chaotic magic. I also represent a little bit more of a hedge witch and a artist as well. I create all sorts of artwork with yarn, clay, and even some digital work.
Hi, I'm Kristen, and I haven't quite defined myself as well as these other ladies have in the particular style of witchcraft that I use. But I would say that I'm an intuitive witch, and I found that the tarot has helped me connect to things that are beyond me, to spirits that are beyond me, and the energy that's around me. I've been reading tarot for 15 years, actually, on and off. And when I do read it, I do it in a couple of ways. I'll do it in the traditional sense where you shuffle the cards and you ask a question and you charge it with an intention. I'll do an intuitive reading where I'll look at the card and whatever information I get goes into the reading. And then I'll also read a little bit from the book that's associated with a tarot deck to get like a more holistic reading. So I find a lot of what I do is just channeling emotions, channeling energy. And I'm learning a lot more about witchcraft from the lovely, wonderful women around me and from audiobooks. So I look forward to learning a lot more. Thanks.
Hello, this is Aédan. I am, I guess we could say, an eclectic hedge witch, but I also work strongly with the dead, especially my ancestors. So I recently learned that's actually necromancy. The way that I actually do it is very much aligned with the definition of necromancy.
More on that later.
More on that later. Because some people would consider it taboo. That would be the quickest way, I guess, to describe my practice. And, oh yes, I try to learn as much about the land that I live on to work with the land.
And it's Rose here again, your local astrologer and hedge witch. I'm sure if you've listened to our monthly Astrology for Witches, you've heard me. And with that, we will get on to the topic.
I don't think we picked a really easy topic this month. It's kind of a tricky thing to narrow down what's a generic taboo witchcraft practice, because opinions differ across the board on what's good and what's bad and what you should and shouldn't do and why. But we've kind of narrowed it down to 3 generic areas. We've got the messy stuff, we've got the scary stuff, and then we've got the sketchy stuff. So we're going to start with the messy stuff, meaning body fluids. Blood, spit, urine, cum. All of the good juicy bits.
All my favorite stuff.
So yeah, starting with the body fluids. of your own.
Mm-hmm.
Do you use them in your craft? Why or why not?
As I would like to say, as a nurse, I do, but I hate it. It grosses me out because I know. Because when you work in healthcare long enough, you're like, what gross in that? Oh, good. let's put it in something else.
I genuinely think that's why so many witches have that immediate, like, no, that's bad, I'm not going to do it. It's that immediate gut reaction of like, oh, that's gross.
Our world is really sterile now when you think about it too. Like, I love all the ads for germs. Like, they're like, oh, this gets rid of germs. And I'm like, what's a germ? I'm like, there's no such thing as a germ, right? Literally your entire body there's more bacteria in your body than cells, but we're terrified of it, you know? So but I am exactly that way. And in nursing, we often talk about everyone has their bodily fluid they're afraid of. And I think it's probably true for everyone else. Like, for me, like snot, I could do poop and blood up the wazoo, but the minute, don't put it up your wazoo, but the minute someone hawks a loogie, I'm like, oh my God.
I lose it.
So I don't do any snot magic. That's just so everyone is clear.
That's not even something that's ever crossed my mind to do, but I guess, yeah, it's a body fluid. It's something you could use.
My soul leaves my body if I see someone with a snot out of their nose. I'm done.
I worked with kids for almost 10 years, and I've got to say, like, thinking about all these bodily fluids, it doesn't really gross me out. And I don't know. And I think, like, if you've ever used like a public restroom or gone for a swim in like a public pool, then yeah, there's a shit ton of germs there. So if you're using bodily fluids in your magic, you have a lot less to worry about rather than, you know, like bringing your family to the pool the next day. Now I don't want to go swimming. What do you guys think?
So this is one of my favorite subjects because I use a lot of bodily fluids, both internal and external ones, in my magic as a grey witch.
It's not magic, Kory.
I haven't used that one yet. That one actually came off as a surprise. I was like, oh yeah, I didn't even think of that. It's like, oh, that's easy access.
Could be a good binding spell.
I find why do I use it? It's another good question. I find there is nothing more powerful that represents you than your own DNA, your own substance to use in your spell to enhance it that much more. If I want to urinate on something, it's no different than how an animal does to marking their territory, right? So, I mean, it honestly increases the odds and the power of your spell 10 times fold to use something as simple as that.
And witches have been using hair and fingernails forever.
Oh, yeah.
So it's if you're okay with hair and fingernails, spit is not that much further
Probably better.
of a stretch.
I often think about, like, everyone always wants love spells, and it's like traditionally putting some of your period in a man's food was like the go-to love spell, and it's like, but I don't want to write that on the internet, but it's but
when I first started witchcraft, it started when I was 13 due to a book, and it was a love spell book. The first one I had ever seen. A girl on the bus gave it to me to borrow, to read through it. And I was so fascinated by this book. One section in particular, it was called Ancient Love Spells. And ancient love spells are not your typical love spell. They actually include a lot of animal bits. They include a lot of body bits, including blood, your period. It had the original recipe for love potion number 9 in it. Yeah, I have it at home now. I actually bought the book. I finally found it. And it's quite the collection of recipes. And they work like a charm. I'm telling you, I've never come across love spells that worked so perfectly.
And we will include that book in the notes at the bottom of the podcast.
Yes, please.
I was going to say another interesting fact, just a witchy fact, is that when you go back through all the love spells, like really old ones, I was just reading in Abrah Arneson's book, The Vessel, where she talks about natural contraception and like the history of witchcraft and a bunch of other things related to contraception. A lot of witchcraft spells for love have abortification herbs in it. So the love spells are trying to make you fall in love, but keep you from getting knocked up while you're doing it, which I find is a really interesting little thing, because you don't think about that very much when you look at the herbs. You're just like, oh, lavender, it's love. And it's like, yeah, it's love, but without the baby. Like you're trying to really enjoy your relationship, not
Really enjoy that.
not get locked down into it. So anyways, that's just a weird little fact I had. Kory, I had an interesting thought about using bodily fluids, etc. in magic, where I feel like that is more like a primal thing that came from witches, like ancient witches many years ago, because they didn't necessarily have all of the resources that we do. They couldn't drive somewhere to forage for something, or they couldn't go to a mine to get rocks or different things, and they basically had, like, they might have lived in a small tribe and maybe didn't, like, they had to walk everywhere. So what their resources were your body, like what's in your body, and just maybe what's in the forest around you.
That's right. Yeah, I agree 100%.
I think another thing that you could tack to that too is, I mean, because you were you're talking about doing these spells that have such heavy emotion tied to them, especially when you're talking about a love spell, right? Or even if you're cursing somebody, or if it's a protection thing. I mean, like, there's really heavy emotions tied to that. Using urine to dominate somebody.
That's right.
To mark, you're marking your territory and like just pissing all over them, right? Like it's tying that physicality of that emotion to it, right? And I think that's part of where that extra oomph comes when you add your own personal fluids to it, because it's a literal figural representation of those feelings.
And it puts in an extra sense. Like, I think people don't realize how much our sense of smell happens, whether we're aware of it or not. But pheromones and piss, the smell of iron in blood, is like a very strong thing. So it's like the sense of smell is attached to you. I believe it's your amygdala. Don't hold me to that. But that's essentially the part of your brain that has like all your deepest memories. Like, that's why when you smell something that reminds you of your mom when you were like 5, it's super emotional for you. So I think there's also a smell component too, I assume.
Yeah, that makes 100% sense.
Yeah.
I mean, aromatherapy is a big part of witchcraft, right? Like every sleep spell you ever read has lavender in it, right? And one of the main reasons why is because aromatherapically, is that even how you, like, is that a word? But I mean, in terms of aromatherapy, lavender is good for helping you relax and to get a good night's rest. So,
which is kind of funny that you bring that up, because one of the strongest herbs to knock you out is the stinkiest one. It's valerian. But nobody wants to put that in the cute little spell, because it smells like toes.
That have been marinating in toes and more fungus and feet for a long time.
I had a David's tea valerian, like a valerian tea from David's tea, and I don't know what they did differently. I'm going to presume it's all the apples that they put in every tea that they've ever made. And I was like, this is actually not awful. I enjoyed it. And then I got like a witchy valerian tea, and I didn't realize the difference until I opened it up, and I was like, this smells awful. Like, maybe it'll taste better. No, it tastes just as awful as it smells. Just take it in capsule form. It's way easier. So, I mean, like, we talked about like personal body fluids and stuff like that, but what are your guys' thoughts on incorporating animal parts into your craft? And I want to like take this a step further than the comfort zone, because I think a lot of people are pretty comfortable using bones and antlers and like maybe pelts, like fur pelts in their craft. But like, I've seen some stuff in Facebook groups where people are doing some really interesting things with like cow tongues and cow hearts, and I want to talk about that, because that kind of gets a visceral reaction out of people.
Okay, so I'm gonna jump on that again. So again, you have to be really comfortable with handling the raw parts and get over the fact that it's a heart, it's a tongue. Buying it's hilarious because people kind of look at you sideways, like, why do you want a cow's tongue or pig's tongue? They're actually very, very useful. I casted a spell not that long ago, and I used a pig's tongue, and the next day it worked.
Used it for what? You share.
So
you don't have to tell us for who.
For who? So fair. I used it to kind of calm a mood down. So some people like to talk too much. Some people gets them into trouble.
They wag their tongue.
Right, they wag their tongue way
binding.
too much. It's a tongue binding.
Yeah.
Not that it wouldn't make them stop speaking, but it would just kind of down the ante a little bit.
And
And
a little smarter about what they say.
exactly. And it just kind of slows it down a little. And by the next morning, it had taken effect. It works so well. And I don't know whether it's a primal thing, whether it's an animal thing, or whether it's just the rawness. It's simple.
It's sympathetic magic.
It's sympathetic.
Yeah,
Exactly.
It's sympathetic magic.
I think that it's more respectful to the animal, to the earth, to the land, to be using
Every
more
part.
and more of the animal
Yes.
rather than letting it go to waste, because that's I find letting things go to waste, it's tragedy, it's sad, it happens a lot. But I do have a question for you, Kory. Once you've done a spell, like let's say with the cow's tongue,
Mhm.
what is the way that you go about disposing of the remnants of it while still being respectful to the animal and its parts, and most importantly and equally importantly to the spell?
So what you would do with this depends. Well, here in Canada we have winter, so it's not always feasible to bury it, right? So burying it would be the number one thing to do, would to be give it back to the earth, to allow the earth to kind of take over and kind of coddle that spell, right? It's still giving back to the animal, bringing it back to the earth. If that's not possible, I just package mine gently and I tuck it in the freezer.
I was going to ask if you're going to use a compost system, because technically our composting system will bury it for you.
It would, but I don't like risking what will happen to it after it leaves. I don't know what they do with that. So to me, because it encases my spell, I am just too nervous to allow that. Maybe I'm just a little bit more of a control freak, but
I mean, I have never left my hair from a hairbrush in a garbage, because
see?
they don't believe that, especially I think it's in Russia where they will not do that. You always flush it down the toilet, and I've always done that.
Oh, fun. Okay, I
So
didn't
same
know that.
idea. Don't want people touching your stuff.
Right. So I tuck it in the freezer until I'm able to bury it, but I always try to bury it.
Okay.
Crossroads are also good if you can bury it near somewhere where
Yes.
there's lots of traffic, or throwing it in a river, which is also our limitation here. But
Yes.
if you have a bigger river that doesn't freeze over.
I personally have issues with the idea of throwing random crap into rivers.
I don't want the
Fair.
cow's tongue. It
So,
depends
like,
on what it is.
It depends on what it is, dude, but you hear stuff like that all the time. It's like, oh, toss it in a river, and I'm like, please don't go tossing your spell jars into a river.
No.
That's literally polluting. Something
Yeah.
that's natural, biodegradable.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
cool, that's fine.
Like opening the spell jar
and emptying it.
Emptying
it
it.
Yes.
into the river.
And then take
Yes.
the jar home,
Yeah.
clean and cleanse that shit, and reuse it.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah, that makes
Yeah.
sense to me. I was going to say, I like to, because I know a lot of people, I think the issue is we're very much about not hurting animals, which I absolutely agree with. I don't think we should hurt animals, but I think the reason that is so strong right now is because we live in a grocery store world. Whereas, even 100 years ago, everyone was killing not everyone.
You don't have to raise and slaughter your own meat, right? It's just there at the
Available.
grocery
Exactly.
store, all
So it's-
prettily packaged.
When you think about it, we already do animal rituals. We do Thanksgiving, we have a turkey. We do, maybe your
The
birthday, you
ham.
have a steak. We're already
Yeah.
doing our animal rituals. We're just not doing the bloody part. Whereas I think, 100, 200 years ago, you're like, oh, well, I have to do a spell, but I also have to kill my chicken. So
Right.
you might as well work this stuff out together. I think the bigger the sacrifice, the more powerful a spell is. Not that I think you should go out and kill an elephant. Obviously, that'd be very big, powerful. But if you're already, working some animal meat or something like that into some other part of your life, I don't think there's any, unless you're pure vegan, pure plant only, even then, whenever I want to do a really powerful spell, I'll ask for a sacrifice. Not that I'll do one. And what'll happen is if something shows up, dead in the area I live in, that was my sacrifice and it offered itself up. So I've never had to kill anything. But I also think I don't know many farmers that would even squeam at that. They would be like, well,
It's interesting that you mentioned sacrifice, because that's on the list to talk about under the scary stuff. Because when you read the history and the lore, sacrifices were a huge part of witchcraft, right? Whether that be an animal or a human sacrifice. not that I'm condoning human sacrifices, like, please don't go killing people.
Too far.
That's too far. But I mean, like you said, I mean, like, if you're a farmer and you've got animals that you are raising and are eventually going to be slaughtered, I don't see why you couldn't take that slaughter and use it as a sacrifice to fuel your spell. But and then at the same time, I mean, for those that don't have animals, if you're coming at magic from an animist perspective and everything has a spirit, well, plants have spirits. If you're harvesting plants, are you not harvesting them and sacrificing those plants when you set them on fire or you stuff them in a jar? Or...
Yeah, it doesn't have to be an animal per se.
No, there's a dozen different sacrifices you can make. A sacrifice could be a fast.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not gonna eat for 24 hours. Like, that's my sacrifice to this spell. Or I'm gonna give up this thing, whether it's your cell phone or alcohol.
Very Lent of you.
Right? Very. But I mean, it's a thing, right? I mean, like, some witches do that. That's what they make, that it's their offering to their deities or their spirits in exchange for assistance in their spell work.
And you're redistributing energy, essentially,
yeah.
In the simplest form. Like, you're taking the power of this and putting it over here.
Yeah.
But I always remember that someone said that, what is it, trees scream? They've proven scientifically, and I'm like, okay, well, that's nice to know.
What's
Now,
the definition of screaming?
Yeah, now I'm like, everything is a sacrifice.
Well, isn't it like the smell of freshly cut grass is a defense mechanism of the blade of grass to warn other grass that it's been injured? I mean, I don't know why they do it, because it's not like the other grass can do anything about it, but they do it.
Get out of the way!
Oh, gosh. Kyla and Kory both, I was hoping maybe you guys could talk a little bit about your bone throwing sets. Since we're talking about bones and body parts and stuff like that. Nothing like too crazy detailed, just,
No.
Share a little bit about it.
I have 2 sets of bones. I have one made of chicken bone, which I ate the chicken. So, I consumed it. I certainly didn't sacrifice it. It already came pre-done. So, I clean the bones, of course. I strip them. You soak them. You soak them then afterward, after washing them in soap and water, in some hydrogen peroxide solution. And it bleaches them, but not enough to weaken them, so we don't use bleach. And then, because you've gone through all of this process with the bone, it tends to kind of, I don't want to say bond to you, but it just becomes more personal. And because you've put so much effort and work into cleaning and caring for these bones. So from there, I usually carve either symbols onto it with a Dremel. And that kind of helps bind them even more to myself. So when I do a bone throw, it's usually for a yes or no answer. So depending whether the bones are crossed or whether they're all, none of them are touching, will indicate yes or no. So my chicken bones are by far a lot more superior because I've had them longer and because I clean them and took care of them myself. The second set I got when I was in the States, in Salem. They are coyote, and they do nothing for me. I really wish they did, and it's just because I haven't built any sort of connection to them. So it doesn't matter what you do with them, they do nothing, and they make no sense. So reading them is very difficult. So it's something that if you want to get into that, I highly suggest that you make it personal. You make it your own in some way. I tried sleeping with those bones in my pillowcase for months and they still did nothing. So what I highly suggest is either engraving something on them or doing something with them that is more personal, because that will make the world of a difference. What Kyla does with hers are a little different than what I do with mine. I think you have the layout, right?
Yes, yeah. I actually found a handkerchief from the thrift store, and I kind of bleach tie-dyed it a little bit because I was really into bleach tie-dyeing at the time. I tie-dyed everything, and I have a basically like the crossroad symbol, the circle with the cross in it, section it off into 4 sections. And when you toss the bones down, it really depends on where they are, where they fall, how close they are to each other, how close they are to you, how close they are to the person asking the question. I haven't had a lot of experience with it yet. I still haven't done a lot of readings. I'm still connecting with my kit that I made, and so I haven't really done a lot of readings, but that is how I plan on throwing my bones, is with the layout. And I have other things mixed in that's not just all bones, and I did the same thing Kory did with the pre-cooked chicken that we had for dinner. I have stuff carved into the bones, different symbols and that to represent different things. And some of the other things that I have in my kit, I have this little pendant, and it's a little purple moon with a black cat on it. And it was actually hand carved by my husband from a purple button we found on the ground. And he asked me to pick it up, and I'm like, what are you going to do with the button? He's like, just pick it up and give it to me. And then he made me this pendant out of it. And the little hoop had fallen out of it years ago, and it's been sitting in my jewelry box forever. And I decided to put that in my kit to represent love and affection. So now it serves as a part of my bone kit. I also have a human tooth. It represents truth and lies. I have a little skeleton key to focus on, like, the key to your question.
So they kind of grow their meaning as your kit gets
Exactly.
collected.
It's kind of a combination of a bone throwing kit and a magpie oracle.
I was going to ask, there's another name for when you have a
Magpie
collection.
oracle.
Love that.
They're
So weird.
because like, you can do a magpie oracle with no bones, no body parts. It's just little trinkets. I mean, you can actually buy magpie oracles that come with like 100 different trinkets,
Or if
and
you
then
have children.
you assign the meaning to them. Or if you have kids, or if you're a hoarder of jewelry and random little trinkets like I might be. I've started building a magpie oracle. I've got about 10-15 pieces in there. And then I was like, I don't know what I'm doing with this. And I never did anything.
That's kind of where mine was going, and then I abandoned it. And I'm like, nope, just
So
the bones are good.
It's one of the numerous, we're witches, we collect things to like research and learn, and it's on the list. I have the pieces. I just need to do the rest of it.
One of my favorite pieces in my bone kit is this tiny little seashell, and it's closed.
It's so cute.
It is sealed closed. And I actually use this to represent basically evil in my kit. But it doesn't mean evil as in like something malevolent or anything like that. It basically would represent something hidden that's there under the surface, that's hidden from you. So it can mean something not good, but it's more of like a warning rather than this big evil thing.
It's really
But yeah, it's one of my favorite little things because you don't know what's in there.
No. And it doesn't smell, which is what's really impressive.
Right?
We've kind of already started hopping into the scary stuff when we're talking about the sacrifices and stuff like that. I wanted to bounce back to Aédan's comment earlier about how she accidentally found out that she does necromancy. And talk about working with the dead and death magic specifically, because there's a difference between those.
Yeah.
Aédan, you want to share your story of how you became a necromancer?
My surprise necromancy work?
Yeah.
So I'll just explain, because people might be like, how do you not know that was necromancy? How do you not know what you're doing? Well, funny thing is, it's just that in my family, especially on my mom's side, death is not a taboo. If anything, my mom was always surrounded by death, not in a way that people just drop around her, but in a way that all her career paths, she wanted to work with death. She originally wanted to become a funeral director, but it wasn't suitable for the family life she wanted. So she then actually became a hospice nurse, and she found a lot of her power in that. and she became almost like a physical psychopomp, which for people who don't know what that is usually a spirit that helps you cross over into the other world. And so she really found her power in that. And so talking and reminiscing about the dead in our family was never a taboo. It was just normal. And so for me, when I started to explore my craft further in the last few years, and me and my mom became more comfortable in facing our ancestry because we are mixed, and there was a lot of taboos in our ancestry about who we really are, what we really are, and that led us to really get to know a lot of our distant and recent ancestors. And I became somehow very comfortable with the great aunt. And I have stories about this great aunt that maybe will come out in future podcasts depending on the subject. But this great aunt, for some reason, took a liking to me. And I just became very comfortable talking with her. I never met her. My mom met her. It was her aunt, I guess. But for me, she would be a great aunt. And there's a lot of details, and I understand why now her and I have become so close. But it's to the point that I started to work with this aunt, this great aunt.
To clarify, your aunt has passed.
Oh, yes. Oh,
Okay,
yes.
I was going to ask the same question. I was like, just to...
She's passed a long time ago.
Okay.
She passed in
Okay.
the 80s, I believe.
Okay.
And... yeah,
that clarifies a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You never met her, but you work with her. But long story short is that she's the first ancestor I became comfortable and actually started to talk to and started to engage her for spells and engage her for guidance and then communication. Now, this great aunt had a Ouija board, and it's well over 100 years old, and every time we use it, her name comes up first, and it tells us that she is still guarding that board. And that was some of my first actual interactions with her. And so I didn't realize it was actually necromancy I started to do, because necromancy is you work with the dead, you commune with the dead for the outcome you want. You work with the dead to get messages. And I didn't realize that's actually what I was doing the entire time, because every time I do tarot, oracle, actual like spell work for manifestation, dream work, all kinds of workings, I actually engage the ancestors that want to work with me, and a lot of times it happens to be that great aunt. And now it's become so, like, I've become so familiar with a lot of them that if there is a sign somewhere, I know exactly it's them, and that it's them guiding me, and it's them putting me on a certain path. And I never, like, put two and two together that that's necromancy.
Until we were talking about the actual definition of...
Yeah.
Well, that's the thing, is when people hear the word necromancy, it's been Hollywoodized, right?
Yeah.
And it's like, it's very different from in movies, in games, and when you think of necromancy, you think of like
Zombies
raising the dead,
yeah.
and real life necromancy is very different, and that's like, you didn't even notice you were doing it because it's not that Hollywood version of necromancy.
And it's so weird because it's not that Hollywood version, yet things happen that, again, people wouldn't believe, and they would be like, no, that's something you see in a movie. Where it's like, I will get a message about something, and then next thing I know, my mom will be doing a tarot reading, and then she'll get the same message. We still haven't talked to each other, and then like I'll message her the next day. I'll be like, yeah, I have had this message come up, and she'll be like, no way. So it's like there's just very specific things that will happen where it's like you can't deny that is that ancestor, because that is their sign, that is their way of speaking. It's very mind-blowing, and although it's not like what we see in Hollywood where it's like, oh, I'm raising the dead, making a dead person talk. Like, I love the show Salem. I love it. I don't know if anyone saw it, I love it, but there is like that Hollywood necromancy, and it's like that would be cool, kind of morbid the way they show it, but be cool.
What did they show? Sorry, I haven't.
Oh, there's one where they cut off the face of a dead person, and then they summon like the spirit to talk through the face, and then the face is talking, but it's just the face. It's very.
It just makes me think of like Repo, the genetic opera. I don't know if anybody's seen that, but Paris Hilton's in it.
I've seen
and
bits of it.
It's like my favorite movie ever. Like the big thing about this movie is it's in the not so distant future, and plastic surgery is like this huge
biggest
trend.
thing.
It's like the biggest. Everybody's getting plastic surgery to the point where you can go and like upgrade your organs because you just want fancier organs for whatever reason, and you can finance these surgeries. And if you fail your payments, they send a repo man to repossess their product. It is a fabulous movie, and with Halloween coming up, it's a nice, good, gory horror movie. It's also a musical.
I was just about to say that.
It's also a musical. It's it's an opera musical, like
Oh my
goth
gosh,
rock
yeah.
opera. It is fucking fabulous.
Movie suggestion for the month. There you go.
In the last part of the movie, Paris Hilton is big on plastics. Her
Don't
face-
throw away the end.
face falls off.
No! Now we know.
It's fucking great. It's not relevant to the storyline. Her face falls off though, and it's fucking amazing because it's Paris Hilton and her fucking face falls off.
What was that? I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
What she's known for, her face.
It's great. Sorry, so off topic.
That's okay. And now a little message from our sponsors. It's tricky shopping as a witch. The big brand stores don't sell things with soul. That's why witches need the Bell Hospital, where swank items are found for you, whether you're looking for vintage styles or that nostalgic item for your home decor. Surround yourself with spirit from the Bell Hospital. That's the TheBellHoste bull.com. The Bell Hospital. Link in the comments. And now back to our show. I was going to say, as far as death magic goes, because, oh my god, my brain can't even think about what I was going to say. I'm so obsessed with Paris now. Because I do death magic myself. Obviously, I think that's probably one of the magics I do the most of, not necromancy. I actually don't have the privilege of being talked to by people that have passed, just my karma. But I do magic to help people pass, similar to your mom working in hospice. And I know a lot of people probably think that's right up there with doing, well, how I feel about love spells, where it's like, why are you doing that? But if you work in healthcare long enough, and if you are largely intimate with it, then you kind of know that we are keeping people alive for far longer than they want to be alive. And one of the things you hear the most in healthcare is, please let me die.
Assisted suicide.
Yeah.
It's a big debate.
Which is, I mean, and it's legal in Canada now, and I'm involved in that as well with my job, so that's one thing. But what often happens when people are unable to talk is that the family members will keep grandma alive for 20 years who can't talk, can't move, seems to be in quite a bit of pain. And so for me, death magic is super important in the sense that I don't think I could do it and still make a person pass who didn't want to pass. But I do think sometimes it gives them the edge to go over. And I mean, I know that is controversial, obviously, and I think it depends on how strongly you believe life is important and how strongly you believe quality of life is important. Because, I mean, I know a lot of people put a lot of energy into living forever, and that only makes sense.
But do you want to live forever if you're suffering?
Exactly. Only if you're a vampire, right? Like that. And beautiful.
Young and beautiful forever.
I find like there's not like no emphasis is put on like the beauty of passing. Like it's called a life cycle for a reason. You're not supposed to stay alive forever, because then when you do, it's like the opposite happens. The beauty of life is sucked out of you. Your life force is sucked out of you, and like as you get older, then unfortunately you can't move like you used
You're
to.
basically a living dead.
And and you're right, like it's people suffer incredible amounts just to stay alive, when really what does that really mean? Like you just keeping the physical body going. And death is hard, yes, but I find we don't honor it enough.
We used to be a lot more connected to the process of death, like the human race, and the whole community used to be involved in the whole death rites process, right? In preparing the body and burying the body. Like it used to be a community thing. You used to be able to see
Mm-hmm.
all of that, and nowadays,
You send them off to the hospital.
You send them off to the hospital, and they die.
Hospice living, or
And
send them off to get their bodies are prepared.
If you ever see them again, they're a fucking Barbie doll, you know, pumped full of all kinds of chemicals and whatever, and 10 pounds of makeup on their face and made to look as pretty as possible so that they look like they're alive. But that's not how it used to be, and it's made such a disconnect between how we process death. Death used to be a celebration, and now it's the end of the world when somebody dies.
Just piggybacking off of what you just said, where death used to be more of a ritual, it didn't used to be this big scary thing. So when my familiar passed, so she was a dog husky mix, had her for 11 years, and finally she came at a point where she got really sick, and she gave me that look where she's like, I'm not fighting this one. So I had to make the decision of putting her down. What was harder was knowing that I would also be taking her away from my family, because that was a piece of me that they had while I was away. So that was harder, but I was at peace with her telling me that she was ready to cross over. But the way that we did it, and I wouldn't change a thing, is that we all went. Me, my mom, my dad, my sister, my brother-in-law. We all went to the vet. I picked her up. I walked her down that hall. I brought a white blanket because white is very symbolic of that transition. It's honoring of life. Like, a lot of people associate death with... I love the Victorian era so much with the black and everything, but it didn't feel right. It's like, it's not her end. And I knew she would be with me afterwards. And so it was a ritual. It was a celebration. We were all around her, and we honored her in those final moments all together. And finally, when the vet said, okay, it's time to start doing the process, then it was just me and my dog and the vet. And finally, I was the last thing she saw. She, fell back as the drugs kicked in, and I wouldn't change it. I wouldn't change anything about it, because that's how death should be, is that it shouldn't be this, oh my God, I can't bear to look at this. I don't want to be in the room, or this and that. It's like, well, you're going to have to face it at some point, whether it's yourself or someone that you love. You're going to have to face it and be there for that person that was there for you, or that animal. And that's just it. It was one of the most sacred things. It was hard, obviously, because I knew I wouldn't be able to hug her again physically, but I was very confident that she would be there. And she's shown herself in the afterlife, in my dreams. Every time I ask for her, she shows up. But I think that was very reassuring. And people are so afraid of the unknown, and I think that's what feeds into the whole making death a taboo, and then that makes death magic a taboo. So, yeah. I just wanted to piggyback off of that, where it's like, it should be that ritual again.
I was going to say something that a lot of people get confused about from my experience is that a lot of people think that the opposite of life is death. But death is actually the opposite of birth. We don't have any clue what the opposite of life is, because we can't experience it as living beings. It's not possible. So it's hard to recognize that it's actually a gateway. And so, if you look at it that way, instead of this state of non-existence, playing into the whole feminine masculine energy thing, which I always think about way too much, but I think that has a lot to do with it, because we're so fixated on masculine energy of achieving and getting further, and because it's kind of that arrow metaphor of going straight up. It's like death doesn't go straight up, right? It comes back down, which is feminine energy, that circular energy, which I think is why witches tend to be more comfortable with that part of the magic, because technically we tend to be more in touch with cycles.
Moon cycles.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I just think it's really interesting, when people don't want to deal with that or think about that, because I think it adds a whole nother level to your practice when you're able to get the balance of the dark with the light, if you want to think of it that way. Yeah.
I just wanted to say one thing before we move on to another topic. I find that when you think about death, it's really just when you're no longer using your physical body. And if you believe in reincarnation, or if you believe in something beyond the physical body, then death is really just one part of what happens in your life. Like, I know for sure that something happens after death. I'm positive of it. And I felt my grandmother after she passed. I was like, okay, so there's something beyond. And I mean, there just has to be, like, there's so many times where I felt presences, and it's just so hard to explain.
What was our third topic?
So the third general topic is the sketchy shit.
Okay.
So I think broadly, and we've kind of touched on this a little bit with love spells, but I think broadly,
but we didn't talk about love spells yet. Still,
no, we've talked about love spells, but not in the taboo practice sense.
Okay.
Broadly, I want to talk about like consent.
That's what love magic
in magic, right?
Yeah.
So I mean, like that applies to love spells on somebody else. It applies to hexes. It also applies to bindings and sex magic, and all of that good stuff. The hazy gray area where do you guys sit on that?
As a new witch, I haven't quite made up my mind yet on I'll talk about hexes. I haven't quite made up my mind on that yet, because a lot of what I'm hearing from books that I'm reading or listening to is, you know, the golden rule: ye harm none, do as ye will. But
the Wiccan rule.
Are you reading Wiccan
Thank
books?
you.
Yeah.
It's very specific.
yeah. Well, I mean, the golden rule: do unto others as you'd have done unto yourself.
Yes.
I'm rubber,
Yes.
you're glue. Something. Yeah.
Yeah, so
It's still
the same thing.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's a bounciness.
It's about it.
So
yeah.
So what I'm saying is, like, if I see an incredible injustice in front of me, those situations I'm compelled to do. I feel compelled to do something. Like, for example, I'll just be very honest. Like, I saw, like, I've it's something that I'm very close to. Like, I've worked with kids for many, many years and seen a lot of different things. So I saw, it was kids that I knew, and I was at the park, and I saw one kid just like bullying another kid, like just so to the point where you could see that he was crushed. And you like, and I know this person's family, and you know that it's just, they just feed into the ego, they just feed into all, they're just enabling the behavior. And I was just so like, and just the child was the child who was the victim was just suffering and crying. And I felt compelled to hex the child who had done it. And I know that
the parents, but
I know that that's probably like,
direct.
that's a very like, oh, you know, from the parents, and it's a child, but it's like, as someone who's worked with children for many years, there's sometimes when you see a child who's doing things like that and who just doesn't give a shit, or who enjoys the suffering of others who are kind. This child was trying to stick up for his friend to this person who was like known to be a bully. So I hexed him.
And I imagine when you were a kid, you would have loved to have someone who would have protected you like that. I think that plays into it.
I had to learn how to protect myself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's, I mean, in a way, you're being the parent or the adult to yourself that you can.
That's another reason why that's a hazy area for me, because like it's something that I've experienced too, and I just don't think that kids should be allowed to bully each other like that. Like, there has to be a force that looks after maybe the more vulnerable ones.
As a mom, I have flat out looked at my kid and told her that if some kid is fucking with you and they will not stop, give me their name.
And a piece of their hair if you happen to come across
if
it.
you happen to, I've literally told my kid, like, just to get a kid to leave her alone, I've like walk up to that kid, grab a piece of hair, and say, my mom wants this, and just walk away. And you could drop it in the garbage, but I promise you that kid will leave you the fuck alone. I mean, and she thinks I'm joking, but I'm like, I did that in high school. Like, when I was in high school, that was when The Craft came out. And there's that like super popular scene in The Craft with Rachel. And it's not Rachel that pulls the hair, it's Sarah.
I love that you know the names.
It's like one of my favorite fucking movies. Sarah pulls the chunk of hair out of the bully's head, and then she ends up going bald. And I had some of the popular kids find me in the library at school reading witchcraft books, and all of a sudden I go to school on Monday and it's, oh my god, she's a witch, she's a witch, she's a witch. And like everybody everywhere is all pointing and laughing and whispering and whatever. And I was just like, yeah, okay, fine. Walked up to the one girl who was the loudest. And I was just like, yeah, I'm a witch. Yanked a piece of hair out. And I said, this will come in use later. And I literally threw it in the fucking garbage. But nobody ever said anything after that.
It's interesting,
Ever.
though, how even the implication of witchcraft through history, even in the modern day of science, people are still like, but I won't take any chances.
What if?
Let's just
Right?
right?
The psychology about it.
Like, it's,
right?
I didn't do it. And then, like, ironically, by the end of the school year, I ended up being in with the popular kids because I started smoking very, very young. And I started smoking before all of them, right? So now I was the cool, edgy kid that, that might do witchcraft.
Communal witchcraft. Share a cigarette.
So, like, all of a sudden I was it was ironic. I didn't do anything.
When this is not a message to you kids to start smoking.
No, don't smoke, kids.
Don't smoke. It's bad. Smoking is bad for you. Don't do it. But it was just weird how that worked out, and I didn't consciously do anything. Right? How do y'all feel about consent?
I mean,
in spells, in spells. We're not talking about.
Here's my thought, and I think everyone should consider. Every spell you do, we've talked about it in the last episode, takes away something from someone else because we live in the material world. Unless you're literally manifesting things and you're out of the thin air, you're taking something from someone. If you're doing a job spell, if you're doing a love spell. So you're taking away someone else's permission to have that by doing it. So, I mean, I have a hard time believing you can do consent magic and still do a good chunk of spells. Like, I'm not saying there's not, you could be like, oh, we're in love, let's do a hand binding. That's a consent spell.
Yeah.
But you can't do money magic without taking some money from somewhere, right?
That's right.
Unless you're some governments that print their own money. They have their own money magic.
That's different.
I think that, like, if we're just sort of going off of what Rose was saying, you can't, like, we live in a world where it's like you can't always ask permission for everything. You can't ask permission to exist. You just have to go forth and try to get what you need in your life that's going to make you better and that's going to make you a better person and help to take care of your own tribe better. So, I don't know, that's a really, really good one. I never even thought about that. Like, every time you get something for yourself, like, a better job, you could be taking that opportunity away from someone else. But
well, and something to consider, and the reason I am pro consent for everything but magic is to consider the fact that with the shape of society, women tend to give up as much as they can to everyone else. Like, a mom will always feed her kids first. A wife often wants to do what their husband wants first. It's just the way we're structured. If you're taking away the ability to take what you need by saying, oh, now you have to ask for it, you might as well not be doing magic anyways. Because if the world was going to give us shit, it would have given it to us already. Like, that's the challenge.
And I think that's what it is exactly, right? If you could have it without asking, you'd already have it. You wouldn't need the permission anyways. I think there's some gray areas in here, though, right? I mean, a lot of people have issues with love spells specifically. You'll hear just about everybody will tell you, don't ever do a love spell.
Which, are you going to tell us about your love spell? Oh, you got a love spell. Or no, or not. You have something else.
No.
It's fine.
It's kind of piggybacking, like, the gray areas.
Yeah, the gray areas of consent.
So it's like, for me, it's like, if you've done me wrong, I'm not going to ask you consent to do a revenge spell or to get justice. But
a lot of people will tell you that it's wrong for you to do that spell.
But it's self-defense. It's self-justice.
But that's the gatekeeping of society, right? Where they don't want people to take their power back because it ruins the shape of the system, right? Like, they want the people on the bottom to keep doing what they're doing, be poor, don't have opportunities, just keep, and then you get the message, oh, well, if you just worked harder, and it's like, all of us have worked hard.
I think that's a big part of why witchcraft as a whole is considered this big, bad, scary devil thing, because the powers that be, whether that be, certain religions or governments or whatever, They don't want you to have that power. They don't.
Upsets the status quo.
Right, it upsets the
Yeah.
status quo. They don't want you to have the ability to get the things they're trying to keep from you. They want to be, way up here, and they want you to be way down here, and they need to keep you down there with that foot on your throat. But if you're doing witchcraft, you're going to get away from that. You're going to get those things that they're withholding from you.
Another thing I wanted to add to, it's like another place where I won't ask consent, is like to do a spell for someone's wishes. So like somebody's like, I really want this job. I really want to ace that interview. It's like, well, I personally believe that I need to forget about my spells once I'm done them to release them and let them go. If I tell my friend who I'm going to do a job spell or a pregnancy spell or something like that, because that's what they want. I'm not going to make someone get pregnant if they don't want to. But let's say they're trying to have a child or they're trying to get this dream job. I know if I tell them I'm going to do a spell, they're going to be like, did you do it yet? Did you do it yet?
They rely on it.
Exactly.
Yeah. And then their
They lean on it.
expectations.
Yeah.
What if this person is against witchcraft?
They don't have to know.
That's the consent
Right?
angle.
And then there's the consent angle, right? I mean, like, is your spell going to work if they don't believe in your witchcraft or if they're against it?
If they say, like, I'm not for the church, but people are like, well, I'm going to pray for you and I hope you get that job. It's like, well, I didn't ask for you to pray for me, but I mean...
I'll take it.
Yeah.
Ask Sky Daddy. Maybe he wants to.
Yeah.
When you think about it, it's like you're just sending positive intentions. Like if you're doing something
With a candle.
There you go, exactly.
I often think of it as very comparable to the idea. I have this conversation with my daughter all the time about lying. I find people without power are often told that you need to be honest all the time, and yet the people with power very rarely are, which says to me that it's like we are always warned off doing bad things, but the minute you have power or any sort of money, it's like, oh, that guy's cheating on his wives, and well, yeah, but he's a multi-millionaire. That's, what do you expect? And it's like, why is it suddenly,
Okay.
that when you have power and money that you can essentially do anything you want? Like, why are we supporting that thought process?
Well, it's kind of like whenever they say it's like when a crime's punishment is a fine, what you're saying is people who are poor, that is the punishment for that crime. But if you have money, it doesn't really matter.
Yeah.
It's okay for you to do that crime because you'll just pay the money and move on with your life. But if someone who is poor, it's like they get this fine, it's gonna like cripple them financially. So it's like, yeah, when the punishment for a crime is a fine, it's only for the poor people.
Yeah, and I mean, that's the idea of witchcraft, I think, is really to rebalance the system, which limits the consent. Although I do agree with not doing love spells on people who do not already have feelings for you.
Yeah.
Yeah, or
Yes.
who are in another relationship.
Yeah.
Correct.
It's more of a morality thing at that point.
Yeah.
You know, it's like, don't break up someone else's relationship because you want this person, because then you're just a dick.
And it's never going to be a good relationship because it'll be based off of complete selfishness.
Mm-hmm.
And personally, I compare love spells on somebody who doesn't have feelings for you akin to rape. You are forcing
Yeah.
this person to feel something that they don't. And that's just wrong.
I did. It's not a love spell. It worked. And this is recently where I've had experiences with love spells. Didn't work out well. It definitely attracted the guys, but not the right guys. But this last spell I did, it was just to encourage him to, how do I say, like, it was just to encourage him to show what he was saying, basically. He was making a lot of promises. Which
is a truth spell.
It was essentially a truth spell, actually, yeah, because there was a line in that spell that said something along the line of, show me your love is no lie. So it's basically a spell to push him in the right direction to actually express how he feels about me. And at first I thought it didn't blow up in my face, but it was just like, oh, it didn't work the way I was hoping to. where we ended up breaking up, but the rest of the spell came on later where now he's showing me that he's putting in the effort to not really regain my trust, but to show me that he actually meant it when he said he really liked me. He's now putting in the efforts for the things that I told him that like what I need in a relationship to feel valued. So now that he knows that he didn't entirely lose me, that I never hated him, because we didn't break up in like a nasty way, but now he's actually showing me his devotion, and that he's starting to express that he likes me and that he wants something more. And so not that we're back together, we're playing that by ear, but hey, the spell worked because now he's actually doing what he said. Like, he's showing his feelings, which is what I wanted from him. So it's not that I made him love me, it was a push. And
to prove it.
Exactly. And at first it was like, fuck, it blew up, and I guess his love was a lie. Because we broke up, and like there was an explosion that happened, not like a nasty fight, but it was like a tower tarot card moment. And then once all the rubble was on the ground, I was like, oh, it's just us two standing still. So yeah, it's like that's not really a love spell, but it's like a push for someone to show you what they're really feeling.
Or transparency. I would call it like transparency spell, which I think most people want in relationships. Like there's so much you have to dig through in relationships to get to the truth.
Exactly.
So
Kory, I think you've got a love spell story.
I would say it's more of a binding spell. And I think this was more at a time when I wasn't really practicing much, but for some odd reason I was compelled to do this, and I thought, you know what, let's just try this out.
It seemed like a good idea.
It seemed like a good idea at the time. And I think...
Did it fall under the category of fuck around and find out?
And it was definitely interesting, and it definitely lingered on a lot longer than it should have. So to begin with, I met this person before I moved here to Ottawa, and we ended up hanging out quite a bit. We liked each other very much. I think we were from different cultures, and that kind of threw him off. And so I was like, well, I just want to give him that little push just to like help him, because he wants to, but he doesn't want to, but he does, but he doesn't. And it was just like, I don't know, maybe it was a purely selfish moment, and I will admit that. And I did something super simple, such as a piece of red yarn and a picture. And it went as simple as that. And that legged on where he could not let go. Even when we had a fight, like I told him, okay, you do you, I'll do me. Like, let's not talk to each other. Let's just go our separate ways. Never fail. Within 3 months-ish, there was always a message in my inbox going, how are you doing? There was always him drawn back, and I couldn't for the life of me, didn't matter what I did with that picture and the yarn inside that little black bag, didn't matter what I did with it, it never failed. And for about 10 years, that lingered on until I met Nikka here, and she gave me a wonderful suggestion, and she suggested using a cord cutting spell, which was awesome. Worked very, very well. It was quite the experience to watch that happen, because it had been something accumulating for 10 years. And to watch it come apart was phenomenal to see. I don't know whether it was just the candles I was using, or whether or not it was just that much energy into those candles. But it was quite the sight to watch those candles burn down. And they're just those little tiny...
chime candles.
Yeah, little tiny candles that, they don't burn for more than like 20 minutes. And you sit there and you watch his candle burn into a puddle within minutes and try to engulf yours while yours is standing strong. It was quite the epic sight. And never again have I heard back from this person.
That's a great spell. I do this spell called the Block and Delete, and I tell everyone about it, and it's really good, and it works. I mean, they still get around it sometimes, but it's so satisfying to block them again.
Right. That's fair.
It goes
That's
on
fair.
forever.
We were touched on sex magic. So I just wanted to, like, I think the most obvious thing for everybody is that this is where consent is really important, in the sense that you wouldn't force anybody to have sex with you, or you wouldn't force two other people
they
to
don't
have
have
sex.
to know that there's any magic involved.
Well, that's
true. I never said that you'd have to admit the spell, but I'm just putting that out there.
Well, that's the thing. A lot of people think when they hear sex magic, they think that it's magic to make somebody have sex with you. And that is not what it is in the slightest.
Okay.
It's more of the act of having sex and that release of energy when orgasm. You use that energy to fuel your spell. It's not to make somebody have sex with you or anything like that. It's
not
basically
rapey.
It's to use it as a tool.
Yes. And
They want to have sex with you.
Yes.
Yes. There's full consent.
Yeah, it's just regular intercourse, and all you're doing is using the energy of the passion between you two to fuel whatever the spell you were doing.
I'm glad that I said that, though, because I think that like me saying that as a new witch is probably like exactly like you said, like what most people automatically assume, which is obviously an incorrect assumption, which is why I'm glad that I'm here, so I can learn more about what it really is. And I have a question, though, like if you're, doing the nasty or whatever, and then you're trying to harness that energy into a spell, you're not going to like climax and then right away be like, okay, I got to catch this thing and then I got to put it into a spell. So I'm curious, how do you do that?
Well, one of the things I've seen online was that somebody mentioned that they have like a shelf or a headboard above their bed, and they'll set up their spell ahead of time, like earlier in the day or whatever. And when after having sex and climaxing, they just kind of mentally direct that energy to wherever you have your spell set up. It doesn't even need to be above the bed. It could be over in the room somewhere else. Or
so
on
you
your
have
altar.
some sort of talisman that will hold that
Yes,
energy.
yeah, that charge.
Interesting.
I just opened my window.
Honestly, super easy way to do that is jewelry. Wear a piece of jewelry while you are having intercourse. And then you're funneling that energy of that climax into that literal talisman. And you're wearing it, so it's touching you, and it's just super simple.
So it's right there, pressed between.
My husband is definitely. I've recently told him about sex magic, and he's like, "We should do that more often."
Most men are pro sex magic.
Yeah.
Because they don't have to do anything other than show up and have sex. They're like, I don't need to do any weird witchy shit. No, I'm just.
Even then, sometimes they're okay with a little weird witchy.
Right?
Yeah.
That's hot.
Yeah.
There's Paris Hilton for you.
Yeah.
It's hot.
And that's it, witches. That's our take on taboo witchcraft. We hope you'll join us on the Facebook group, Great North Witches Collective, so we can hear your thoughts on taboo witchcraft. And otherwise, remember to like, follow, or subscribe us on any of your favorite podcast apps. Until next time.
Bubbles. Dark basement. Scuttles. Fingernails.